Welcome you all again for joining today's webinar. My name is Dr. Vanita Isaimani and I am the member of Research Cell at the KEA Shroff College of Arts and Commerce, which is ranked by the Maharashtra government also. Hello, is my voice audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My name is Dr. Vanita Isaimani. I am the member of the Research Cell at the KEA Shroff College of Arts and Commerce, which is ranked India's 8th, Maharashtra's 2nd, and Mumbai's 2nd private higher education institutions from Higher Education Grand Jury ranking 2021-22. Today, we are presenting the 4th and the last day of the national webinar on scholarly writing, publishing, and research in social sciences. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them up into the question box in the Zoom control panel. We'll bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have time for the question and answers at the end. This webinar, which started from 9th July to 13th July 2021, organized jointly by the Library, the Learning Resource Center, in collaboration with FDC and Research Cell of our college, has come to the last day of the session. I now request Dr. Anita Basim ma'am to give a brief report of the previous day session of this national webinar.
Good afternoon, everybody. A brief recap of yesterday's proceedings is in order. In her riveting lecture, Research in Social Sciences, Dr. Vibhuti Patel walked us through the whole process of social science research and gave in-depth insights into its various aspects. She also spoke and emphasized the importance of the various aspects of research, like research philosophies, social theories, and research approaches one has to consider while contemplating a topic for research. Having dealt with these aspects in detail, she spoke about the process of writing a research paper, vital concerns, important questions, topic selection, research design, research strategies, methods, and methodologies one has to take into consideration. All this calls for accuracy in research work and meticulous documentation. So she also said that one could use traditional sources for information, but should also tap social media for one's purposes. She summed up her talk by walking us through the entire research process, which starts with the research idea, then goes on to the review of literature. She spoke in depth about the theoretical formulations of the research problem, empirical research questions, that is the operationalizations of it, research design, data collection, data analysis, answering empirical research questions, theoretical interpretation of the results, and comparison with earlier results, finally coming down to the conclusion. All this shows how thorough she has been and how meticulous she has been, and we know that this last session is also going to hold great promise for all of us. Thank you very much. I have finished. Who's going to take over?
Yes, thank you, Anita ma'am. I now request our librarian, Dr. Alka Wadhwana, to introduce our today's guest and welcome him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today's speaker, Professor Atman Shah. He is a lecturer in Department of Economics at St. Xavier's College, which is an autonomous institute, Ahmedabad. He has been invited by various national and international institutions to conduct the workshop on SPSS. He has completed a certificate course on basics of R from Harvard University. He has worked as a subject expert in international and business economics for MHRD project given to Educational Multimedia Research Center, that is EMRC, Gujarat University. We welcome you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thank KES Shroff College for giving me this opportunity to deliver a session in this webinar. And I would also like to thank Vibhuti ma'am for recommending my name. So I'll start my presentation. Let me share my screen. Is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
So topic given to me is quantitative research in social sciences. So I'm planning to cover the idea of quantitative data analysis, types of measurements, sampling methods. So we have two types of sampling methods, probability and non-probability, parametric versus non-parametric tests, a brief introduction to hypothesis testing, and some widely used statistical tools in social sciences. So let me begin with the idea of quantitative research. In quantitative research, measurement of the variable or parameter is very important. For example, we want to examine the consumption pattern of a particular community. So how do we measure consumption pattern is very important, because the selection of the statistical tool depends on how we measure our variable. So suppose you want to measure the opinion or knowledge or any other parameter or variable. So measurement is at the center of the quantitative research. As we know that qualitative data cannot be computed. So in quantitative analysis, the data is presented in numerical codes. And then we use this data to describe something, to explain something, or to predict. So our goal is to describe, explain, or predict something with the help of the quantitative data that we have. So quantitative data is nothing but the numerical codes. Now, what do we mean by scale of measurement? So measurement is a process of assigning numbers to our observations with certain rules. And how the variable is measured is known as scale of measurement. So how consumption pattern is measured, how opinion is measured, how knowledge is measured, how income is measured, that is known as level of measurement. And the selection of the statistical tool, any statistical test, depends on this scale of measurement or nature of the data. So whether you use parametric test or non-parametric test, that depends on your nature of the data or scale of measurement. And if you use any statistical software, you need to tell the software that my data is nominal, ordinal, or continuous. Right? So you need to decide whether your data is qualitative or quantitative. And if it is quantitative, you have the nominal data, ordinal data, or continuous data. So let's understand the scale of measurement in detail. Stanley Steven Smith in 1946, in his famous research paper on the theory of scales of measurement, he developed 4 levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So we need to bifurcate, or we need to identify the scale of the measurement of our variable or parameter by using the logic developed by Smith. Let's understand the nominal scale. Nominal scale is used to give the labels to the categories. The important thing is order doesn't matter. So labeling doesn't have any numerical value and they are mutually exclusive. So you cannot assign the same numerical value, same label to more than one category. Let's take this example. Suppose you have income group, data on income group. And you have 3 income group, low, middle, and higher. So you assign 1 to low, 2 to middle, and 3 to higher income group. So this income group becomes nominal variable. Here you can see order doesn't matter. You can assign 3 to low, 2 to middle, and 1 to higher income group. The order of the label does not make any sense. And therefore, this income group is a nominal variable. A nominal variable with only 2 categories is known as dichotomous or binary variable. In the previous example, we have seen that there are 3 categories: low income group, middle income group, and higher income group. But a nominal variable with only 2 categories is known as dichotomous or binary variable. Let's take the example of gender. So suppose in gender you have 2 categories. One is assigned to male and 2 is assigned to female. Then gender becomes dichotomous variable. Suppose you have income group. And here you have only 2 groups, group 1 and group 2, high income and low income. Then income group becomes dichotomous variable. So a nominal variable with only 2 categories is known as dichotomous or binary variable. Let's understand the idea of ordinal scale or ordinal variable. Here the order of the variable is important. So basically it is used to depict the level of happiness, pain, satisfaction, etc. So it contains the information about the rank. Take this example. Suppose a firm has collected the data on the consumer's satisfaction about the services it provides. So 1 is assigned to highly satisfied, 2 is assigned to satisfied, 3 is assigned to neutral, 4 is assigned to dissatisfied, and 5 is assigned to highly dissatisfied. So here you can see order of the labeling is important. You cannot change 5 to highly satisfied and 4 to satisfied. In nominal variable, order doesn't matter. But in ordinal scale, order is important because it contains the information about the rank. But here, the important thing is the distance between 2 points is not meaningful. So distance between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4 and 4 and 5 is not meaningful. How much one consumer is more satisfied than other cannot be known. Suppose consumer A gives 4 ratings and consumer B gives 5 ratings. So which you can identify that consumer B is dissatisfied, more dissatisfied than consumer A. But how much consumer B is more dissatisfied than consumer A, that cannot be identified. It means that the order, the distance between these 2 points is not meaningful. So that is the idea of ordinal scale. So first we have nominal variable in which order doesn't matter. We are just assigning the numbers to our nominal variable or the categories of the nominal variable. A nominal variable which has only 2 categories is known as dichotomous variable. Second is ordinal scale in which order is important, but the distance between these 2 points is not meaningful. Let's understand the interval scale. So interval scales are numeric scales in which order and exact difference between the values are meaningful. So interval scale has all the properties of ordinal scale, and furthermore, the distance between the values are meaningful. So here differences make sense, but ratios do not make sense. Ratios are not important. And interval data doesn't have a defined absolute zero. In other words, zero does not mean the absence of the variable. It means that it does not mean the absence of the variable. Let's take the example. Suppose you have the variable called temperature. So here the difference in 30 degree and 40 degrees Celsius is the same as the difference between 80 degree and 90 degrees Celsius. So difference is meaningful. But 100 degrees Celsius is not twice as hot as 50 degrees Celsius. So difference is meaningful, differences make sense, but ratios do not make sense. That is the idea of interval scale. Let's understand the idea of ratio data. Ratio data has all the characteristics of interval data, but true zero is possible. So here true zero means absence of the variable. In the previous example, 0 degrees Celsius does not mean that there is no temperature. Temperature exists. The variable exists at 0. Right? But in ratio scale data, 0 means absence of the variable. So ratio data has the characteristics of interval data with true zero. See the example, height. 0 height means absence of height. Weight, population, length, work experience, income, consumption expenditure. If your consumption expenditure is 0, that means consumption expenditure does not exist. If the population is 0, that means population does not exist. So here true zero means absence of the variable. Now, which mathematical operations you can do with the data? So if you have nominal data, only equal to and not equal to sign can be used. You cannot do greater than or less than, addition or subtraction, or multiplication or division. That cannot be done if you have the nominal data. You can only identify whether 1 is equal to male or not equal to male. 2 is equal to female or not equal to female. But you cannot say that 1 is greater than 2 or 2 is greater than 1. Right? There is no sense or there is no reason to believe that 1 is greater than 2 or 1 is less than 2 or 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. That doesn't make any sense. Let's talk about the ordinal data. In ordinal data, you cannot do addition or subtraction and multiplication and division. Here you can say that 1 is greater than 2 or 1 is less than 2. Right? Because orders are important. Order matters. So whether if you assign 1 to more satisfied and 2 to less satisfied, then you can say that 1 is greater than 2 in terms of satisfaction. So therefore, you can use greater than or less than sign. Let's take interval data. Here, multiplication and division is not possible. Why it is not possible? Because 0 doesn't mean that the variable is absent. So 0 temperature doesn't mean that temperature does not exist. And therefore, you cannot use or you cannot do multiplication or division. Ratio data is kind of, ultimate data. You can do anything on ratio data. So when you collect the data, whether it is primary data or secondary data, you need to identify whether your data is nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Because the selection of the statistical test depends on the nature of the data. So if you have nominal or ordinal data, you cannot use parametric test. Right? Okay. Let's talk about the sample design. Why sampling is important? We have the difficulties in analyzing the entire population. Right? If it is possible, it is not feasible. So sampling saves energy, time, and cost. It is not possible. We cannot analyze the entire population for our research or for our analysis. So to save energy, time, and cost, we collect the data, we collect the sample from the population. Now the collection of the sample has the scientific method. So we collect the sample from the population using scientific method. Let's take this example. Suppose I want to examine the performance of the students of the government schools of Gujarat. So what is the population? All the students of government schools. Now it is very difficult to collect the data from all the students who are studying in the government schools in Gujarat. So therefore, we need to collect the sample by using a particular scientific method. You need to provide the rationale behind the sample collection. Right? Now let's discuss the types of sampling. So first is probability sampling. In this case, each observation of the population has an equal chance of being selected in the sample. This equal chance is important. Each and every observation of the population has an equal chance of being selected in the sample. So it uses random sampling techniques. And it helps us to collect the sample which truly represents the data. We need to collect the sample in such a manner that our sample represents the population in an appropriate manner. Let's take this example. Suppose you want to examine the effect of new teaching method to whether new teaching method is helpful to improve the result of the students. And for that, you need to collect the data from the students. Now, you cannot analyze all the students. You cannot collect the data from all the students. Suppose you are collecting the data from FY students only. Suppose you have 3 years, FY, SY, and TY students, and you are collecting the data from FY students only. So here your sample does not represent the population in an appropriate manner. If you collect the data from FY and SY only, again your sample does not represent the population. So we need to collect the...
Atman sir, you are not audible, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, now you are audible.
So we need to collect the data in a proper manner, in such a manner that our sample truly represents the population. Because at the end, we are making the inferences about the population parameters by using sample. So probability sampling is widely used in quantitative research. So there are 4 types of probability sampling: simple random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling, and systematic sampling. Let's understand these 4 types with the help of example. So first we have simple random sampling. Here each observation of the population has an equal chance of being selected in the sample. So suppose you want to examine the effectiveness of new teaching method, whether this new teaching method is useful to improve the result of the students. So here you are randomly collected the data from all the students. That is the idea of simple random sampling. So each student has an equal probability, equal chance of being selected in the sample. And that is why it is known as simple random sampling. Second is stratified random sampling. So here, entire population is divided into several subpopulations that are individually more homogeneous than entire population. So here what you are going to do, you divide your population into subpopulations. So suppose students of economics, students of psychology, students of sociology, student of political science, students of history. So these are your subpopulations.
मेरे मास्टर्स के पेपर है कि पेपर दे ये ना उधर जाने का प्रोग्राम.
Excuse me, someone's mic is unmute. Yeah. So in stratified sampling, you divide your entire population into several subpopulations. So it can be gender-wise, it can be subject-wise, it can be income-wise, it can be caste-wise, it can be religion-wise. So suppose you are dividing your population subject-wise. So each subject, each group is known as strata. So group of economic students is known as one strata. Group of psychology students, second strata. Group of political science students, third strata. And then you randomly collect the sample. So that is known as stratified sampling. Here you can see the group is homogeneous, right? So here I have written individually, the subpopulations are individually more homogeneous than entire population. Because in one strata, we have all the students of economics only. So that becomes a homogeneous group in terms of subject. Third, we have cluster sampling. Here, entire population is divided into clusters and random sample are then collected. Now, the difference between stratified sampling and cluster sampling, the strata has the homogeneous entries. In cluster, we have the heterogeneous entries. So suppose you become the cluster of first floor classes, second floor classes, third floor classes, fourth floor classes. First floor classes become your first cluster, and then you collect the data randomly. Second floor classes, second cluster, third floor classes, third cluster, and so on. So here clusters are heterogeneous and strata are homogeneous. That is the basic difference between stratified sampling and cluster sampling. Normally, cluster sampling is used when you have the large population. And fourth, systematic random sampling. So every kth element in the population is sampled. So in this case, first unit is selected randomly and remaining units are selected at fixed intervals. So suppose you decide that suppose your total population is 100. You have the 100 students and you want to examine the 25% of the students, 25% of the population. So every fourth student becomes your sample, becomes your observation. So first you decide, the first unit is selected randomly. So suppose you decide rule number 3. You assign the roll numbers from 1 to 100 and you decide rule number 3 is my first observation. And then every fourth student or every fourth roll number becomes your sample or your observation. So that is the idea of systematic random sampling. So these 4 are types of probability sampling because each and every observation has a probability of being selected in the sample. And these are widely used in quantitative research. Now, what is non-probability sampling? The probability of the observation being selected in the sample is unknown. We do not know the probability of one observation being selected in the sample. And all observations don't have the chance of being selected in the sample, right? So it does not use random sampling techniques. So here sampling depends on the researcher. How researcher wants to collect the sample, that is important when we are talking about the idea of non-probability sampling. And it is widely used in qualitative research. So again, we have 4 types of non-probability sampling: judgment sampling, quota sampling, convenience sampling, and snowball sampling. So what is the basic difference between probability and non-probability sampling? In probability sampling, we have the known probability of each and every observation being selected in the sample. Here, the probability is unknown, or all observations don't have the chance of being selected in the sample. Let's understand judgment sampling. So here a researcher selects a sample to confirm some criteria. So suppose you want to examine the labor problems. So you are not going to collect the data randomly. Suppose you go to one factory and then collect the data randomly. That is not possible because you want to study the labor problems. So therefore you need to collect the data from a particular observation, from a particular worker which who have faced the problem of discrimination. Right? So therefore, in this case, random sampling is random sampling does not help you to collect the data in a proper manner. Second is quota sampling. So here you divide the population into mutually exclusive groups. The groups are mutually exclusive, and then select the sample with respect to certain known features. So suppose in population you have 30% male and 70% female. So you subdivide your population and then collect the sample in such a manner that your sample represents 30% male and 70% female. And therefore, each and every observation does not have an equal chance or does not have an equal probability of being selected in the sample. So you need to follow this quota to collect the sample. So that is why it is known as quota sampling. Convenience sampling. So as name suggests, sample is drawn from that part of population that is close to hand. It depends on the convenience of the researcher. And fourth, snowball sampling. Here, a researcher recruits other participants for a study. And it is used when the sample of the study is very rare. Suppose you want to examine the social structure of the prostitutes. So here it is very difficult to find the sample. So you ask someone to find the sample on your behalf. So you ask one person, that fellow will help you to find other people. So that is known as snowball sampling. A researcher recruits other participants for a study. Now let's discuss hypothesis testing. Are we taking questions now or at the end of the session?
Sir, at the end of the session.
Okay. So let's discuss the idea of hypothesis testing, which is very important in quantitative research. Because when we want to predict something or examine something, we need to identify whether there is any significant difference between our sample statistic and population parameter. To do so, we have the concept of hypothesis testing. Now, why hypothesis testing is important? Let's take this example. Let's take the previous example, the effectiveness of new teaching method to improve the result of the students. Now, suppose after adopting a new teaching method, the result of the students have increased by 5%. So we have the increase of 5%. Now, whether this 5% is statistically significant. So before adopting a new teaching method, the result was 70%. After adopting a new teaching method, result was 75%. So we have the improvement of 5%. But whether this improvement is statistically significant or not, to check that, we need hypothesis testing. Now, as we know, we collect the data randomly from the population. We are not going to analyze the result of all the students. What we are going to do? We collect the sample randomly from the population. We analyze the sample, and then we are interested to know the effects in the overall population. You analyze the sample and you have analyzed the sample and you have found that the results have increased by 5%. And then you are going to make the inferences about the population that yes, new teaching method is helpful to improve the result of the students. So we analyze the sample, but we make the inferences about the population. So whether we have this effect due to randomness or it actually exists in the population. Since we have collected the data randomly, this rise of 5% is due to randomness or it actually exists in the population. To examine this statistical significance, we use hypothesis testing. To identify or to test whether we have the effect due to randomness or it actually exists in the population, we need the hypothesis testing. Now, what is hypothesis testing? So hypothesis testing is basically an assumption that we make about the population parameter. So in other words, it tests a statement or assumption about the population by using a sample. So this statement or assumption that we make about the population parameter is known as hypothesis, which may or may not be true. What are the steps which are involved in hypothesis testing? So step 1 is specify the null and alternative hypothesis. Second, specify the level of significance, that is alpha. Third, calculate the sample statistic by using the appropriate statistical test or perform the test in any statistical software. Fourth, compare p-value and alpha. And fifth, make the decision. Now let's understand each and every step in detail. So what is null and alternative hypothesis? What is alpha? Appropriate statistical test, p-value and alpha, and decision rule. Let's begin with the idea of null and alternative hypothesis. A null hypothesis is a statement or proposition about a population parameter that is assumed to be true. So a null hypothesis is nothing but this statement or proposition. Now the question is, can we convert each and every statement into hypothesis, into null hypothesis? The answer is no. Let's take this example. The first statement says that the average height of class 12 is 5.8 inches. And statement 2 says that William met Jesus Christ yesterday. These two are statements. Now, you can see statement 1 can be examined scientifically. You can collect the data of class 12 students. You can perform a particular statistical test. whether it is qualitative or quantitative. And you can identify whether the average height of class 12 student is 5.8 inches or not. Second, it is also possible to verify, to retest this statement by using the same sample. Take statement 2. Is it possible to test it scientifically? No. Second, it is possible to verify it after 1 year or 2 years or 1 month or 2 months? No. So statement 2 cannot be converted into null hypothesis. Right? It is not possible. Statement 1 can be converted. So every statement cannot be converted into null hypothesis. Now, how do we frame the null hypothesis in this case? Consider statement 1. The average height of class 12 is 5.8 inches. The null hypothesis says that the average height of class 12 is not significantly different from 5.8 inches. So null hypothesis basically says that there is no effect or no difference. In general, we say that there is no effect or no difference. Alternative hypothesis says that there is a significant difference. So see the null alternative hypothesis. Sorry, this is alternative. The alternative hypothesis says that the average height of class 12 is significantly different from 5.8 inches. So you have to be very careful when you frame your null and alternative hypothesis, because interpretation of your result depends on the null and alternative hypothesis. Because at the end, we either reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. So this is how we frame the null and alternative hypothesis. Null hypothesis, no effect. Alternative hypothesis, significant effect. Please keep in mind that hypothesis testing is used to check the statistical significance and not the mathematical significance. 3 is significant, is different from 5. These two are mathematically different. But whether the difference of 2, we have the difference of 2, whether this difference is statistically significant or not, that can be done with the help of hypothesis testing. Right? So here your average is 5.8 inches. When you collect the sample, your sample mean might be 5.6 or 5.9 or 5.10, the mean height of the students. So whether this difference 5.6 and 5.8 or 5.9 and 5.8 or 5.10 and 5.8 is significantly different or not, statistically significantly different or not, that can be done with the help of hypothesis testing. So when we say no effect or a significant effect, we are talking about the statistical effect or statistical difference and not the mathematical difference. Let's discuss one-tailed and two-tailed. So one-tailed test is also known as one-sided hypothesis or directional hypothesis. So here this hypothesis can measure the relationship between sample statistic and population parameter in one direction only, whether the sample statistic is greater than the population parameter or it is less than the population parameter. So that is why it is known as directional hypothesis. In two-tailed test, there is no direction, and therefore it is known as non-directional hypothesis. We are not interested to identify whether sample statistic is higher or lower than the population parameter. We are only interested to know whether there is any significant difference or not. So suppose my, let's take this example. Suppose X is the population parameter and X0 is your sample statistic. See one tail right side, this one, and see the alternative hypothesis. It says that X0, that is our sample statistic, is higher than population parameter. So it shows the direction. Similarly, one tail left side, X0 is less than X. In these two cases, it shows the direction. Whether sample statistic is higher than the population parameter or lower than the population parameter. And that can be identified with the help of alternative hypothesis. From alternative hypothesis, we can identify whether our statistical test is one-sided or two-sided, or one-tailed or two-tailed. See, in two-tailed, we say that both are not equal, but we do not know whether X0 is higher than X or lower than X. So that is why it is known as two-tailed test. Now let's discuss the idea of level of significance. It is denoted by alpha and also known as type 1 error. This point is very important. The level of alpha is specified before we do the hypothesis testing. When you perform the test in statistical software, you need to tell the software that my level of significance is 0.05 or 0.01 or 0.1. So we decide the level of significance before we perform the statistical test. Basically, it shows the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. It is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. So in general, what is null hypothesis? There is no effect or no difference. An alternative hypothesis, there is a significant effect or difference. Now, what is alpha? It shows the probability that we say there is an effect because we are rejecting the null hypothesis. When we reject the null hypothesis, what we conclude? There is an effect, there is an effect. But null hypothesis is true. So there is no effect. So alpha or level of significance or type 1 error is the probability that we say there is an effect or difference when there is no effect. That is the idea of level of significance. It is very important to understand this concept because decision rule, whether we reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis, depends on the level of significance and our p-value. So what is p-value? What is level of significance? Concluding that there is an effect when there is no effect. So that is why we are making an error. So it is known as type 1 error. Let's take this example. Suppose alpha is equal to 0.05. So this means that there is 5% chance of rejecting a true null hypothesis. Or 5% chance of concluding that there is an effect when there is no effect. If alpha is 0.01, so there is 1% chance of rejecting true null hypothesis or 1% chance of concluding that there is an effect when there is no effect. If alpha is 0.10, so there are 10% chances that we reject true null hypothesis or 10% chance of concluding that there is an effect when there is no effect. So that is type 1 error. So this table shows the type 1 and type 2 error. If your null hypothesis is true and you accept, you are not making an error because we are accepting true null hypothesis. If you reject false null hypothesis, there is no error because we are rejecting false null hypothesis. But if we reject true null hypothesis, that is type 1 error denoted by alpha, and if we accept false hypothesis, or if we fail to reject the false hypothesis, then it is known as type 2 error, known as beta. So we have type 1 and type 2 error when we do the hypothesis testing. Type 1 error, rejecting the true null hypothesis. Type 2 error, when we make type 2 error when we fail to reject the false null hypothesis. Let's understand p-value. When you calculate any statistical test manually, we are not going to calculate p-value because we compare the calculated value and tabulated value. So if you use t-test, you calculate the t-statistic and then you compare this t-statistic with given tabulated value. But when you perform the test in software, the software generates the p-value and we compare the p-value with our level of significance to decide whether we reject or not, whether we reject our null hypothesis or not. So let's understand the idea of p-value. The p-value provides evidence against the null hypothesis. The smaller the p-value, the stronger the evidence that we should reject the null hypothesis. As I said, it provides the evidence against the null hypothesis. In other words, it provides the smallest level of significance at which the null hypothesis would be rejected. I repeat, p-value shows the smallest level at which the null hypothesis would be rejected. So any probability above the p-value, the null hypothesis cannot be rejected. It shows the smallest value. Let's take this example. Suppose p-value is equal to 0.02. So there is 2% chance that our result is random and not based on our experiment. So we have the result due to randomness, or there is 98% chance of occurrence of the given event. So what does it show? The smallest level at which the null hypothesis is rejected is 0.02. So you cannot reject the null hypothesis at 0.01 or 0.015 or 0.025, 0.017. 0.02 is the smallest value at which we can reject this null hypothesis. Now, how do we make decision? So our alpha is 0.05 and suppose p-value is 0.03. If you perform any statistical test and assume that your p-value is, the p-value that software generates is 0.03. So here you can see p-value is less than alpha. Now what is p-value? The smallest level at which this null hypothesis can be rejected. This is the smallest level. So if we can reject the null hypothesis at 0.03 level, we can easily reject the null hypothesis at 0.05. So if p-value is less than alpha, the null hypothesis is rejected. right? Again, 0.03 is the smallest level. So if we can reject the null hypothesis at 0.03, we can also reject the null hypothesis at 0.05. So when p-value is less than alpha, reject the null hypothesis. Suppose your p-value is 0.09. So this again shows the smallest level. The smallest level at which this null hypothesis can be rejected. Now this is higher than alpha. So the smallest level at which null hypothesis can be rejected is 0.09, and therefore this null hypothesis cannot be rejected at 0.05. So when p-value is greater than alpha, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. We cannot reject our null hypothesis. So this is the decision rule. If p-value is less than alpha, reject the null hypothesis. And if p-value is greater than alpha, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. And this decision rule remains the same for each and every statistical test, whether it is parametric, whether it is non-parametric. Now let's understand the types of test: parametric test and non-parametric test. So parametric test can be used when we have normal data and continuous data. So normality assumption is required to perform any parametric test. And second, we need continuous data. So we need interval or ratio scale data. So as I said earlier, the selection of your statistical test depends on the nature of the data. So when you have the data, first check whether you have nominal, ordinal, interval or ratio scale data. If your data is interval or ratio scale, check the normality assumption. And there is no reason to check the normality assumption for nominal and ordinal data. So if you have nominal and ordinal data, you cannot use any parametric test. So first check or identify the nature of the data. If it is interval or ratio scale, check the normality. If it is normally distributed, use the parametric test. If it is not normally distributed, use the non-parametric test. So non-parametric test is also known as distribution-free test. So you can use non-parametric test when your interval or ratio data is not normally distributed, or you have the ordinal data or nominal data. So that is the difference between parametric test and non-parametric test. Now let's discuss some widely used statistical test in social sciences. So I have bifurcated in parametric and non-parametric manner. So suppose you want to test for one sample. What is the use of this test? To compare the sample statistic with given population mean. To compare the sample statistic with given population value. So in parametric test, we have one sample test, and in non-parametric or the non-parametric alternative to one sample t-test is one sample Wilcoxon sign rank test. See the example. In parametric test, we have to test whether the salary of women employees different from the national average. So here national average is our given population mean. Sorry, given population value. So you randomly collect the data or sample and then compare the sample statistic with this given population value. Right? So first check the assumption whether your data is normally distributed or not. Your variable is salary. So salary is a continuous data. So check the normality assumption. If it is normally distributed, use the one sample t-test. If it is not normally distributed, use one sample Wilcoxon sign rank test. See the example of non-parametric test. To test whether the Uber ratings of blind people different from the overall average. So overall average is given value. You see here we are comparing ratings. So rating is ordinal variable. Now on a scale of 0 to 10 or 0 to 5 or 0 to 20. So here we are interested to examine the ordinal variable and therefore we can use non-parametric test. There is no need to check the normality assumption here. Test for paired samples. So here we are interested to compare two paired groups. In other words, two related groups. The observation in group 1 is associated with observation in group 2. So in parametric test, we have paired samples t-test. In non-parametric test, we have paired samples Wilcoxon sign rank test. See the example of paired samples t-test. To test whether remedial classes have significant effect on the result of the students. So here you are collecting the data from the same students before and after remedial classes, and that makes a pair. So you have the student 1 marks before remedial classes and marks after remedial classes. Suppose it is 50 and here it is 53. So this makes a pair. So we are collecting the data from the same observation at two different points of time, and therefore we have the paired groups or related groups. Let's check the example of non-parametric test. To test whether new teaching method is significant to encourage students' interest on a 0 to 10 scale in economics. So again, you are collecting the data from the same students before and after adopting a new teaching method. But here your data is ordinal because you are collecting the data on 0 to 10 scale. So in that case, we can use paired samples Wilcoxon sign rank test. So Wilcoxon sign rank test has two utilities. It can be used for one sample and for paired samples. Now suppose you have two independent groups or two unrelated groups, right? Or you want to compare these two unrelated groups or unpaired groups. So in parametric, we have the option of independent samples t-test. Let's see the example. To test whether there was a significant difference in the wage of male and female employees. So here we have two mutually exclusive groups. These two groups are mutually exclusive, right? And we have wage rate or salary, which is continuous data. So we can use independent samples t-test if it is normally distributed. A non-parametric alternative is Mann-Whitney U-test. So it can be used to test whether there was a significant difference in the ratings of new car between people live in small and large cities. So again, these two groups are mutually exclusive. People live in small cities and people live in large cities. We have two unrelated groups. We want to compare the car ratings. So ratings is an ordinal data. So therefore, we can use Mann-Whitney U-test or non-parametric alternative to independent samples t-test. So here I have the details of all t-tests. So use of one sample t-test is to compare the sample mean with observed or population mean. Paired t-test to compare the mean of two paired groups. And independent t-test to compare the means of two unrelated groups. We have the null and alternative hypothesis. So null hypothesis says there is no significant difference, and alternative hypothesis says there is a significant difference. And these are the examples. You can have a look. I'll wait for 5-10 seconds. Okay. Suppose we have more than two groups, more than two independent groups. The parametric test that we are going to use is one-way ANOVA. Now, one-way ANOVA is also used when we have two groups. The result of one-way ANOVA and independent samples t-test is same when you have only two groups. But for two independent groups, we have independent t-test, an exclusive test to examine the difference between two unrelated groups, and therefore we do not use one-way ANOVA. Otherwise, if you perform one-way ANOVA on two indifferent groups, the result of one-way ANOVA and independent t-test remains same. So we use one-way ANOVA to know the difference or to compare the more than two independent groups. Let's take the example. To test whether there was a significant difference in the wage of UG, PG, and PhD holders. So I have three independent groups: UG students, PG students, and PhD students. And then you want to compare the wage of these three independent groups. The non-parametric alternative is Kruskal-Wallis H test. So here again we have the ordinal data. You see the ratings of new car between people living in rural, semi-urban, and urban areas. So we have three independent groups: rural, semi-urban, and urban areas, and ratings is our ordinal variable, and therefore we can use Kruskal-Wallis H test. Right? So this is used when we have more than two independent groups. And what is the difference between one-way and two-way ANOVA? In one-way ANOVA, we have one independent nominal variable having more than two categories and one continuous variable. So here you see this previous example. Suppose this is education. The variable is education. So education is our nominal variable having three categories: UG, PG, and PhD. Right? So education is our independent nominal variable, and we want to know the effect of this independent nominal variable on wage rate, that is our continuous dependent variable. So one-way ANOVA is used to compare the means of one independent nominal variable, to compare means compare one independent nominal variable on one continuous variable. In two-way ANOVA, we have two nominal independent variables and one continuous dependent variable. So in one way, we have one nominal independent variable. In two way, we have two nominal independent variables. So in one way ANOVA, we have the effect of one nominal variable on continuous dependent variable, because that is what we want to examine. In two-way ANOVA, we have the separate effects of two nominal variable on our dependent variable and interaction effect or simultaneous effect of two nominal variables on our dependent variable. Let's see this example. To study the effect of level of education on annual income. So here we have nominal variable education, in which we have three categories: school, UG and PG, and our continuous dependent variable is annual income. In two-way ANOVA, we have two nominal independent variables: level of education having three categories and gender having two categories, and its impact on annual income, that is our continuous dependent variable. So in one way ANOVA, we have the effect of level of education on annual income only. In two-way ANOVA, we have the effect of level of education on annual income separately, effect of gender on annual income separately, and effect of level of education and gender on annual income simultaneously, which is known as interaction effect. So in two-way ANOVA, we have interaction of two nominal variables. So that is the difference between one-way and two-way ANOVA. Two-way ANOVA is also parametric test. So you need to check the normality assumption before you perform the two-way ANOVA. Let's see this. I have taken this from Levin and Fox, one of the finest books on the use of statistical tests in social sciences. So here we have nominal, ordinal, and interval data, or let's take continuous data, interval, and ratio both. Ordinal and nominal. Whether we want to test the difference or correlation. Right? Now, what do we mean by correlation or association between two variables? Y are associated with each other, or X and Y are correlated with each other. We say that they both have some connection, but whether X causes Y or Y causes X, that cannot be identified with the help of correlation analysis. So X and Y, if they are associated, we cannot identify the causal relationship between X and Y. They are only interested to know whether these two are associated or not. That is the idea of correlation analysis. Okay, let's take first nominal variable. Suppose you want to find the differences between two nominal variables. Let's take this example. Suppose you have gender and opinion. Opinion on this new farm laws, right? And gender. So here we have two categories, 1 and 2. In opinion, you have two categories, whether you are in favor of farm laws, yes or no. Now you want to know whether the opinion of male and female are significantly different or not. Or consider this, suppose you have the, instead of gender, occupation. people occupied in agriculture sector and non-agriculture sector. So whether the opinion of people occupied in agriculture and non-agriculture sector is significantly different or not in terms of these three new farm laws. To check that, we can use chi-square test because our both variables are nominal. Right? Okay. Let's take ordinal data. First, we'll check this test of difference and then we'll move to measure of correlation. Ordinal data. Now, suppose you want to find the differences. So as I said, one is median test, non-parametric test for comparing samples, Mann-Whitney test when we have two groups, two unrelated groups, Kruskal-Wallis test when we have more than two groups, and Wilcoxon sign rank test when we have two paired groups. Wilcoxon when we have two paired groups. And third is continuous data. So we have T ratio. In T ratio, we have all T tests, one sample T test, paired T test, and independent T test. And for more than two groups, we have analysis of variance. Now, do not get confused by the name analysis of variance. Whether it is one-way ANOVA or two-way ANOVA, both statistical tests compare mean only. ANOVA compares mean. Right? So when we do the analysis of variance, at the end we are comparing the mean of more than two groups. So if we have one nominal variable and one dependent variable, use one-way ANOVA. If we have two nominal variables and one dependent variable, use two-way ANOVA. So that is the idea of test of difference. Then we have measure of correlation. Right? Again, what is correlation? It shows the association between two variables. That's it. We do not know what is dependent variable or independent variable, whether y causes x or x causes y. That cannot be identified with the help of correlation analysis. So if we have nominal variable, we can use phi coefficient. Now here see it is written 2 cross 2 table, which means that both nominal variables are dichotomous. So both the nominal variables have only two categories. And that is why we have 2 cross 2 table. Right? Suppose gender and opinion, both are dichotomous variable, because in gender we have two categories, in opinion also we have two categories, yes or no. Right? So here we can use phi coefficient to examine the association between two nominal variables or rather dichotomous variables. And we can use contingency coefficient or Cramer's V if we have more than two categories in nominal variable. So larger than 2 cross 2 tables. So suppose you have gender and income group. In income group, you have three options: low, medium, and high. So income is not a dichotomous variable in that case, and therefore we can use contingency coefficient and Cramer's V to examine the association between two nominal variables. Suppose you have ordinal data. So one is Spearman's rank correlation. Spearman's rank correlation can also be used when you have the continuous data, but it is not normally distributed. So Spearman's rank correlation used in two cases. First, you have ordinal data. Second, you have the continuous data, but data is not normally distributed. So your Spearman's rank correlation is a non-parametric test. And therefore, normality assumption is not required to perform Spearman's rank correlation. Another option is Goodman's and Kruskal's gamma to examine the association. There are some advanced statistical tests. And if we have continuous data, we can use Karl Pearson's correlation coefficient. So Pearson's correlation coefficient is parametric test. Normality assumption is required. So before you perform the Pearson's correlation coefficient, you need to check whether your data is normally distributed or not. So therefore, we have the Pearson's correlation coefficient. If it is not normally distributed, you can use Spearman's rank correlation coefficient. So this is the idea of level of measurement and which statistical test is appropriate when you want to examine the difference or correlation. Now let me give you some idea of regression analysis before I complete my session. The correlation analysis says that these two variables are associated, but we cannot identify the effect of one variable on another variable. That cannot be identified with the help of correlation analysis. But suppose you want to know the effect of income on consumption expenditure. Now see the difference between correlation and regression. So we know that consumption is a function of income. So if my income increases, my consumption expenditure also increases. And if my income goes down, my consumption expenditure also decreases. So there is positive relationship between consumption expenditure and income. So from correlation analysis, we can identify that yes, C and Y are correlated. But I want to know if my income increases by 50%, how much increment will be there in my consumption expenditure? If my income goes up by 50%, whether my consumption expenditure increases by 25%, 30%, 40%, 20%, that cannot be identified with the help of correlation analysis. To know the effect of one variable on another variable, we have the statistical tool called regression analysis. So here we have the option of regression analysis, which is known as C is equal to A plus BY. So C is our dependent variable because C depends on Y, consumption depends on Y, and Y is our independent variable. And this plus sign shows that we have the positive effect, positive relationship. Now, what is the problem in this? This equation says that all the variation in consumption expenditure can be explained with the help of variation in income. So no other variables can influence consumption expenditure. But we know that gender, caste, whether you live in rural area or semi-urban area or urban area or metro cities or not, that affect, that influence your consumption expenditure. And the variation in consumption expenditure due to those variables cannot be captured by this equation. And therefore, we need to add the error term in our equation. So now our equation becomes C is equal to A plus BY plus error term called mu. So this mu explains or incorporates all other variables that can be that can influence our consumption expenditure. Now again, from regression analysis, we cannot identify the causal relationship, whether C causes Y or Y causes C, that cannot be identified. Second, the selection of the dependent and independent variable depends on the researcher. You need to tell the software that consumption expenditure is my dependent variable and income is my independent variable. Right? So you need to identify from your subject domain that what is your dependent and independent variable. Suppose, let's take the example of education and economic growth. Education and GDP. So due to higher GDP, we have the more education, or due to more education, we have higher GDP growth. Right? So in this case, both are possible. So in this case, whether you want to taste the effect of education on growth, or you want to examine the effect of growth on education. So the selection of the dependent and independent variable depends on your objectives, on your subject domain. So selection of the variables when you perform the regression analysis is very important. In correlation analysis, you don't need to bother about dependent and independent variable because you are only interested to know the association between two variables. But in regression analysis, whether it is simple linear regression or multiple linear regression, you need to inform the software that this is my dependent variable, this is my independent variable, and I want to know the effect of independent variable on my dependent variable. So here you are interested to know the effect of Y on C, which can be explained with the help of this B, which is known as slope. I'm not going into the theory of economics. It is known as marginal propensity to consume, but that's a different story. So basically this B shows the change in C for a unit change in Y. Change in consumption expenditure for a unit change in income. So if B is 0.85, you can say that if income increases by 100%, consumption expenditure increases by 85%. That is the idea of slope coefficient. So I have my YouTube channel. You can find videos on SPSS, RStudio, statistics, economics, econometrics. I also have the Telegram channel. Yeah, that's it from my side. Again, I would like to thank Shroff College for giving me this opportunity to deliver a session on very interesting topic called quantitative research in social sciences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for a wonderful and excellent session on quantitative research in social sciences. I now request Ganga Sushil, Mrs. Ganga Sushil, member of Research Cell, to start with the question and answer session. And after the session, a small quiz based on the outcome of the webinar is linked with a feedback form. Kindly, everyone attempt the quiz. The feedback form will be posted in the chat box also. Also, it will be enabled in the sent in the Telegram group. The link will be open till 8 p.m. today. Kindly fill the feedback form for the same. Over to you, Ganga ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful session. It was very informative and insightful. We had there are few questions that has come in the chat box. To begin with, sir, can you please explain how type 1 and type 2 error is determined? We conclude hypothesis on the basis of testing.
Okay, so type 1 error is nothing but your level of significance. All right, that is the probability of rejecting true null hypothesis. So when you are performing the test, you are telling the SPSS that my level of significance is 0.05.
Yes.
So you are ready to accept that this research or this analysis has a type 1 error of 5%. So you don't need to determine it.
Okay.
It is given whether you want 5% error, 10% error, or 1% error. You just need to tell the software that I'm ready to accept 5% error.
Okay.
So you are ready to accept to reject your null hypothesis even if it is true.
Okay, got it, sir.
Sir, excuse me, sir. In that case, it depends upon researcher to determine this value.
I'm not. Your voice is not audible.
So
does it mean that each researcher can determine his or her p-value? Significance.
No,
significance.
You see, ma'am, it depends on your subject domain. If you are doing research in medical sciences, they normally use 0.99, 0.01.
Social science, it is 95%.
In social sciences, we normally use 0.05 or 0.10. So that depends on the subject.
Thank you, sir.
So next question is normality distribution applicable in case of Likert scale?
No. See, Likert scale is your ordinal data. So there is no need to check the normality assumption.
Sir, again, Likert scale, when we sum it up, we can use it for ANOVA and other techniques, right? Regression and correlation.
If you're converting your Likert scale into interval data, then you need to check the normality assumption.
So again, interval data, how we will convert Likert scale into interval data?
Sorry?
How we can convert Likert scale into interval data?
Let me give you this example. Suppose you have the data on ratings, right? You are collecting the data on 0 to 10 scale or 0 to 20 scale, and you have 5 observations or five people whose ratings are 5. You have 10 people whose ratings are 10. 20 people whose rating are 7. So here you are not writing the your rating 7, 5, 10, but you are writing the frequencies. Right?
Yes.
So in that case, if you are converting it, you need to check the normality assumption. But if you are writing the scale itself, suppose you are asking me that rate this workshop on a 0 to 10 scale. If I am saying that it is 7 or 8, then it's an ordinal data. So there is no need to check the normality assumption. You need to perform the non-parametric test.
Sir, what about happiness level or satisfaction level? Can you hear me, sir?
Sorry, happiness level or?
Satisfaction level.
Okay.
If we are asking 5 questions based on that. Okay, in that case, it is very much Likert scale is used to measure those 5 statements. And we can sum it up, right? Total of those 5 statements can determine the satisfaction level of the consumer with respect to so and so question.
Yes, so but why you want to check the normality assumption? You have the ordinal data, use non-parametric test. Why you want to convert?
So all important testing is based on the parametric, like regression, correlation.
No. You can use regression analysis even if your data is ordinal. You can use correlation analysis if your data is ordinal.
Okay. But sir,
you can use rank correlation if your data is ordinal. You can use a phi correlation, point biserial correlation, a logistic regression, Probit or Logit model.
The structural equation modeling is not possible, no, sir.
No, that requires continuous data.
Yeah, sir. For those purposes only,
so that is what I'm saying. That is what I'm saying. Do not specify the statistical tool before you collect the data. Do not specify that I want to use structural equation modeling or regression analysis. You collect the data, find the nature, identify the nature, and then select the appropriate statistical tool.
Okay, sir. Okay.
right? Do not define or do not specify before you collect the data that you want to use regression analysis.
Okay, sir. Okay.
You cannot collect the data to use the regression analysis. First collect the data and then identify that which statistical test is appropriate in this case.
Got it. Got it. So next question is, what do you mean by effect size and how to measure it?
What is the effect size of sample?
I have read it in many places. The effect size, say for example, after application of t-test also, whether the sample is adequate or not, to verify that we do effect size testing.
Yes. So see, what I am saying is, effect size basically you have collected the data from the population, right? So suppose you have the 100 students and you are collecting the data from 30 students. So whether this 30, the sample of 30 students is appropriate or not, you need to identify that. Right? Whether to collect 30 students, whether to collect the data from 40 students, 50 students.
So how to go about it?
Sorry?
How to go about it? How to go with the testing?
You have the statistical tests in statistical software. And when you enter the data, they will give you the sample statistic and use the same decision rule. If your p-value is less than alpha, reject the null hypothesis that your sample is effective.
Okay.
Right. So basically, what is the idea of effective sample size? Whether your collected sample is appropriate or not. So if I have 100 students, I collect the data from only 10 students and then I make the decision that yes, new teaching method is appropriate. So I need to check, because I'm making the inferences about the population parameters by using the sample statistic.
Okay.
Right?
Right. Sir, next question is how to determine the size of population in case of like what the example that you gave as like government schools.
Government. So yeah. All the government schools are population.
Sir, how to accurately determine what will be the population size?
You don't need to determine the population size. You need to determine the sample size.
Yeah.
We are not analyzing the population at all.
Yeah. The next question is, without knowing the actual population, can we apply probability sampling techniques? So, for example, if I know a class strength is 60, and in that case, I can apply stratified sampling or random sampling.
Can you repeat yourself?
Am I not audible, Nandini ma'am?
It is lagging.
Okay. So, in case if I want to apply a stratified sampling method or random sampling method, I should be knowing what is the population, right? Is that right? Is that so?
See, if you want to use the random sampling, you need to know the population.
Okay.
If you do not know the population, use non-probability sampling.
Yeah. So, for example, if I want to study population who is traveling in a train, so that population count I will not know, right, accurately.
Sorry.
If I want to study people who is traveling by train.
Traveling
by train.
Your voice is not audible.
Sir, she means to say if she wants to study population traveling by train.
Train, okay. Population traveling by train, okay.
In that case, what will be the population? I mean, what technique to use? I mean, we have to go with.
You can use non-parametric, non-probability sampling.
Okay, sir. Okay.
See, basically, when can we calculate the probability when we have the data on population? Or population is known. If your population is unknown, you cannot assign the probability or equal. Each observation does not have the equal chance of being selected.
Okay. So next, yes, sir. Yes.
Sir, can I? May I come in? Yeah.
Yes.
Anubhuti here. Sir, my question was in case of infinite population, if we cannot actually know the number of people. An example can be those who have taken So it is an infinite population where we cannot know the number of consumers. In that case, is there any sample size which can be considered as fine for the research?
See, there are various methods to calculate the sample size, and to calculate the sample size, you don't need the value of exact population. Right? I forgot the name. Korchen's test or something like that. That gives you the sample size. Right? Even if you don't know the population, the number of the population observations. But if your population is infinite, I suggest to use non-probability sampling, because in that case you don't need to worry about the population.
Anubhuti ma'am. Anubhuti ma'am, done? So the next.
Yes, sir.
The next question is, what is grapevine sampling?
What is?
Grapevine. Grape, G-R-A-P-E, grapevine.
Grapevine sampling. Okay. Let's take the example of a farm, and you are growing wheat, right? So you have 1 row, 2 row, 3. So suppose you have 10 rows. So you are collecting the data from each row. Row 1, row 2, row 3, row 5, row 4, row 5. That is grapevine sampling. So basically, a company is making a wine. The name comes from this example. You are growing grapes in row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, and row 5. You are collecting the data from grapes, and then you are making the wines. So that is the idea of grapevine sampling.
Okay.
Okay, so we have next question from Dr. Bhojraj. He says, what is the difference between chi-square goodness to fit test and test of independence? And what is conjoint analysis?
Okay, let me answer the first question. What is the difference between chi-square goodness to fit and test of independence? See, suppose you want to know whether your data is following a particular distribution. Suppose normal distribution, Poisson distribution, binomial distribution. Now to check whether your sample, you have collected the data from a particular population, whether that sample is generated from that population, or whether your sample follows a particular distribution or not. To check that, you need chi-square test for goodness of fit. What is the meaning of chi-square test of independence? Whether two variables are independent of each other or not. So suppose you have data on gender and opinion. Let me show this slide. See here, we have two nominal variables. Now to know the difference between these two nominal variables, or whether these two nominal variables are associated or not, you need the chi-square test. Right? So basically phi coefficient is nothing but the chi-square test. If you run the phi coefficient, it generates the chi-square value, chi-square statistic. So to check whether your sample follows a particular distribution, you need chi-square test of goodness of fit, and to know whether your two variables are associated with each other or not, that can be identified with the help of chi-square test of association. Yeah, next question.
So what is conjoint analysis?
It is very advanced technique. Basically, it is used in market research to, you know, making the decisions about the product. So we have the 2-3 you know, strategies to sell your product, or 2-3 strategies to make a presentation, or 2-3 strategies to present something, or to put a product in the market. To analyze this kind of decisions, basically we use conjoint analysis, but it is mostly used in marketing or in marketing research field.
So one last question for the day, I guess. What is the minimum size for pilot study? Minimum sample size for pilot study?
I guess there is no such kind of thumb rule that you need, you know, minimum sample size to conduct the pilot study, because basically you do the pilot study before you conduct your full research. So I guess there is no minimum requirement of the sample size for pilot study. I have not come across such kind of literature.
Okay, sir. I think that ends the question answer session. Dr. Vanita, over to you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Atman Shah sir, Nandini ma'am, and Ganga Sushil. I now request our Vice Principal and Director of Self-Finance Courses, Dr. V.S. Kannan, to speak few words about the webinar. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to all of you. It is indeed a great pleasure to meet all through online mode, though we are not physically meeting each other, but we are listening each other in the last 4 days. And first of all, I should appreciate the speakers who have done a wonderful job in explaining how to do a proper research, as well as writing a research paper, and also what are the techniques you have to follow while selecting a journal, and while publishing, what are the parameters you have to follow, and where you can publish it to get Kutch index or all other types of index, also Scopus related index, and Vidwan and everything. They spoke about all this. I believe the teachers who have participated in this 4 days workshop are surely gained because of this, and I'm sure this will totally change your perspective about your research, and especially research writing. But publication is nowadays very much required. We all do publications, but when I am attending many of the conferences, the standard of the papers are very low. We could see, and many teachers are not participating in presenting paper. They are just publishing it for a namesake. But now I believe, I'm sure, because of this workshop, your knowledge must have increased and your takeaways are good, and you are surely going to publish good research papers, and it is good for yourself first, then for your institution as a whole, and also to the country. Because though India is publishing good papers, many number of papers, the research standard is poor. So I also congratulate the department, especially Alka Wadwana and her team, Nandini, Vanita, Razi, and other teachers who have participated in this, Ganga, and they made this program a wonderful session for the last 4 days, continuous effort. And thank you to all of you, and thank you to all participants, because with your support only we can able to. Thank you. I'm sure in future also you will be participating in such programs in KES. And we at KES, we are particular about making good research work. Thank you, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We had almost 67 participants from different states like Andhra Pradesh, Assam, Delhi, Goa, Gujarat, Jammu and Kashmir, Karnataka, Kerala, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, and West Bengal. We are now at the end of the juncture. I now propose the vote of thanks to the resource persons for the 4-day national webinar on scholarly writing, publishing, and research in social sciences. Dr. Shubhada Nagarkar, Dr. Murli Prasad, Dr. Shyam Prasad Pujar, Dr. Satish Munoli, our guide and philosopher for WDC, Dr. Vibhuti Patel, and Professor Atman Shah, for their guidance on research, as research is one of the primary area in the field of education today. Special thanks to Mrs. Nandini Katti Madam, HOD of Department of Economics, Alka Vadwana Madam, librarian, and Dr. V.S. Kannan, the 3 brains behind this webinar. I also thank the entire team of library, extending a helping hand to Alka Madam. I would also like to thank the other organizing team members, Mrs. Ganga Sushil, Ritika Srivastav, Dr. Arun Chandane, Dr. Urmila Patel, Dr. Anita Basin Madam, for the helping hand for conducting the webinar smoothly. My heartful thanks to our management, who is always ever supporting for conducting many such events. My thanks also goes to the participants, whom I am sure of must have gained additional knowledge in the field of research. I am also thankful to all the teaching staff of our college for attending the webinar and would have gained immense knowledge. Participants will get their certificates after 10 days through the email. Thank you all. Nandini ma'am?
Yes, Vanita, thank you so much.
Yeah.
A small reminder again, the feedback is attached with a small test and you will have to attempt it before 8 p.m. in the night. The feedback link will close by that time. Any other instructions, Dr. Alka?
One is, please wait for 10 days because we have to work 4 days feedback, and then this test and everything will take some time. So please wait, and within 10 days, the certificates will be distributed to all the participants. Thank you all for attending and listening this webinar. I hope this will help you in conducting your research, and I have posted the research toolbox in the Telegram group also. I hope this will be helpful in conducting your research work. Thank you.
Professor Atman Shah, there is one last question for you. Kindly give YouTube channel of Atman Shah, sir. So, sir, would you announce it? I think if we type Professor...
presentation with Alka ma'am, so she can forward it.
And madam, even if you type Atman Shah on YouTube, I think his...
very popular.
Yes, yeah, his videos start flashing, and let me tell you, sorry Atman Shah sir, I'm not stalking you, but I quickly checked. You have 9.5K subscribers already on it. Okay, so that is it for the day, and we have come to the end of our webinar. Thank you all, and with Dr. Alka and Kannan sir's permission, I would like to end the meeting.
Thank you, Atman Shah sir. Thanks all.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.